brother stood up in surrogate court and told the judge I was unfit to inherit a single dollar from our father. He said I had been spiraling for years. He said I had a documented history of mental instability. He said I should never be trusted with the family business, let alone Dad's estate. I sat there in the Onondaga County Surrogate's Court on a Tuesday morning in late October, wearing the silver bracelet my father had given me for my college graduation, and I did not say one word. The judge was a woman in her late 50s named Margaret Whitlock. I knew the way she rested her chin on her left hand when something in front of her did not add up. I had watched her do it 8 times before, from a different chair in a different role. She let my brother's attorney finish his opening. Then she did the thing with her chin. She looked up over her reading glasses at the young man in the gray suit standing at the petitioner's table, and she asked him, very quietly, if he genuinely had no idea who his client was attempting to declare incompetent. The attorney blinked. He looked at his legal pad. He looked at my brother. He looked back at the judge. And my brother, who had walked into that courtroom with the smug certainty of a man who had already counted the money, watched the color drain out of his own attorney's face in real time. Let me back up. My name is Hollis Trenton. I'm 29 years old, and for the last 5 years I've worked as a forensic document examiner. That's the technical term. In plain English, I'm the person who looks at handwriting, signatures, ink, paper, indentations, and printer toner under a microscope and tells you whether the document in front of you is a real or a lie. I work out of a small private firm in Syracuse, but the bulk of my casework comes from referrals through the New York State Attorney General's office, the FBI's Albany field office, and a handful of insurance fraud divisions. I have testified as an expert witness in 41 cases. 36 ended in conviction or settlement in my client's favor. 8 of those testimonies happened in front of Judge Margaret Whitlock. My brother Crawford did not know any of this. We had not spoken in 11 years. To understand how I ended up sitting across from my own brother in a courtroom, you need to understand my father. His name was Hollis as well. I'm Hollis Jr., technically, though no one ever called me that. He owned a small letterpress print shop on Burnet Avenue, a narrow brick building with a green awning and a bell that rang when you opened the door. He inherited the shop from his father in 1986 and ran it for 37 years. He printed wedding invitations and funeral programs and birth announcements. He printed church bulletins for half the parishes on the east side. He once printed a poetry chapbook for a woman who had been writing in secret for 40 years, and finally decided she wanted to hold her words in her hands before she died. That was the kind of man my father was. My mother left when I was 7, and Crawford was 11. She did not leave with another man or for another life. She just stopped wanting to be a mother. She moved to Tucson and remarried a man who worked for the gas company, and she sent us a card on our birthdays for about 3 years, and then nothing. My father raised us alone. He worked the press during the day, and he made grilled cheese sandwiches at night, and on Sunday afternoons, he would take us to the public library on Salina Street and let us pick out any book we wanted. No limit. Crawford was always angry. Even before our mother left, he was angry. He blamed Dad for everything. He blamed Dad when our mother left. He blamed Dad for working too much. He blamed Dad for the shop being unfashionable, for not modernizing, for not selling out when offset printing took over. When Crawford turned 18, he moved to Boston, and he barely came back. He went to business school. He got a job at a real estate firm. He married a woman named Whitley, whose family owned 3 car dealerships outside Providence. They had 2 children. I have never met. I stayed. I stayed because my father was a good man, and a quiet man, and somebody needed to. I went to college at SUNY Oswego, and I came home most weekends, and after I graduated, I rented an apartment on Westcott Street that was a 15-minute drive from the shop. I would stop by on my lunch breaks. I would sit on the stool behind the counter while Dad worked, and we would talk about nothing in particular, and the room would smell like ink and old paper and the lavender hand soap he kept by the sink. He started forgetting things about 2 years ago. Small things at first, where he had put his reading glasses, whether he had eaten lunch, the name of the lady who came in every Thursday for printer paper, even though he had known her for 15 years, I noticed. I took him to his doctor. The doctor said early-stage cognitive decline, possibly the beginning of vascular dementia, but it was slow. Dad had good days and bad days. On good days, he could still set type by hand and balance the books and tell me stories about his own father, my grandfather Howard, who had taught him the trade. On bad days, he would call me 3 times in an hour asking the same question. I started spending 2 nights a week at his house. I cooked. I did the books for the shop on weekends. I filed his taxes. I made sure his pills were sorted into the little plastic organizer with the days of the week on it. I did not tell Crawford. I had not told Crawford anything in years, and frankly, it had not occurred to me that he would want to know. Dad died in early August, not from the dementia, from a heart attack in his own kitchen on a Saturday morning while he was making himself coffee. The neighbor heard him fall. By the time the ambulance arrived, he was already gone. He was 68 years old. I was the one who planned the funeral. I was the one who wrote the obituary for the Post-Standard. I was the one who picked out the casket and the hymns and the photograph for the program. Crawford flew in from Boston the day before the service. He stood in the back of the church with his wife and his 2 children, and he did not speak to me. He left right after the burial. He did not come to the reception at the parish hall. He did not help me clean out the house. He did not help me with the shop. 3 weeks later, I got a letter from a law firm in Rochester. Crawford was contesting the will. According to the letter, our father had left the house, the shop, and his savings to me alone. I had not seen the will yet. Dad had told me about it once, 2 years before he died. On a good day, sitting on his back porch with a glass of iced tea. He had said the shop should go to whoever wanted to keep it open. He had said Crawford had made his choices and he had made them clear, and Dad did not want to force anything on a son who didn't want it. He had said if I didn't want the shop either, I should sell it and use the money however I wanted, and he would never haunt me for it. He had laughed when he said that. Crawford's attorney claimed that I had isolated my father in his final years, that I had manipulated a man with diagnosed cognitive decline, that I had positioned myself as the sole caregiver in order to control his finances. The letter claimed that Crawford had documentation of a pattern of mental instability in me going back to my college years. The letter claimed that I had been hospitalized for psychiatric reasons at the age of 19 and had concealed this from the family and from my employer. The letter asked the surrogate court to appoint a neutral conservator to manage the estate while the matter was investigated. The proposed conservator was Crawford's wife's brother, an attorney in Providence. I read the letter 3 times. I sat at my kitchen table and I read it 3 times, and then I laughed, because the laughter was the only thing that came up, and you have to let something come up, or you'll choke. The hospitalization at 19 was real. I had a depressive episode in my sophomore year of college, 6 months after a bad breakup, and during a semester I was carrying 19 credits and working 2 jobs. I checked myself involuntarily. I stayed for 4 days. I came out, I started therapy. I changed my major. I graduated cum laude. I had never hidden it. I had told my father. I had told my therapist. I had told my employer when I applied for my security clearance to handle federal cases. Because lying about that on a background check would have ended my career before it started. Crawford had no way of knowing about that hospitalization unless someone had told him. And the only person who could have told him was our father. Possibly during one of the foggy phone calls Dad had started making in the last year of his life, when he sometimes forgot what was private and what was not. My brother had taken something my dying father had mentioned in confusion, and he had built a court case out of it. I called my boyfriend that night. His name is Patrick, and he teaches earth science at a high school in Liverpool, and he is the kind of person who keeps his receipts in a wooden box on top of the refrigerator because his mother taught him that's where receipts go. We had been dating for 2 years. He drove over and he sat on my couch and he listened. And when I was done telling him, he said something I will never forgive him for, not entirely. He said maybe it would be easier just to settle. He said maybe I should give Crawford a portion and make it go away. He said the legal fees alone could eat through whatever I'd inherit. He said it was just stuff. He said Dad would not want me fighting in court. I told him to leave. I sat on my kitchen floor that night with the letter on the table above me, and I cried for about 20 minutes. Then I got up. I made coffee. I opened my laptop, and I did what I do for a living. I started building a file. Before I tell you what was in that file, I want to thank you for being here. If this story is reaching you, please consider subscribing and leaving a comment, letting me know where you're listening from. It means a great deal to me, and I read every single one. Now let's keep going. My father had been meticulous about paperwork. He had grown up in a house where you kept every check stub and every receipt because that was how you proved you had paid what you said you had paid. The filing cabinet in the back office of the shop had 37 years of business records in it. The desk in his bedroom had 37 years of personal records. I knew where everything was because I had been the one keeping things organized for the last 2 years. I pulled his bank statements first, both the personal accounts and the business accounts. I went back 5 years. I built a spreadsheet. I tracked every deposit, every withdrawal, every transfer, every check. I cross-referenced the business deposits against the shop's invoice log. I cross-referenced the personal withdrawals against the credit card statements and the utility bills. In the last 14 months of my father's life, there were 11 cash withdrawals from his personal savings account that did not match any of his regular expenses. They ranged from $2,500 to $9,000 each. Total amount, $58,400. Each withdrawal happened within 4 days of a phone call from a number registered to Crawford's wife's cell phone in Rhode Island. My brother had been calling our father during the worst stretches of his confusion, and our father had been wiring or withdrawing money for him. I sat there in the kitchen and I felt sick. But that was not all of it, because in the bottom drawer of my father's desk, underneath a stack of old church bulletins he had printed and saved, I found a manila envelope I had never seen before. Inside were photocopies of documents, a power of attorney granting Crawford broad financial authority over our father's affairs, dated 8 months before Dad's death. A handwritten letter purporting to be from my father, stating his intention to revise his will and divide his estate equally between his 2 children, a signed authorization for Crawford to access the business accounts. All 3 documents bore my father's signature, and all 3 signatures were forgeries. I knew they were forgeries within 90 seconds of looking at them. Let me explain how I knew, because the comments on stories like these always ask, and the answer is not magic, it's training. A genuine signature has what we call natural variation. No human being signs their name exactly the same way twice. The pressure varies. The starting points of the letters shift by fractions of a millimeter. The line quality, which is the smoothness and confidence of the stroke, reflects the writer's nervous system at the moment of signing. My father had a very distinctive H. He drew the crossbar of the H with a slight downward slope, and he always lifted his pen between the 2 vertical strokes. Every legitimate signature of his I had ever seen, and I had seen thousands, showed that lift. The signatures on those 3 documents had no lift. The crossbar was flat. The line quality was hesitant in the places it should have been confident, and confident in the places it should have shown the slight tremor he had developed in his last year. They had been traced, probably from a Christmas card. My father used to send long handwritten cards every December. Crawford would have had at least a dozen of them. I sat at my kitchen table at 3 in the morning, looking at 3 forged documents that someone had created to steal my father's estate from him while he was still alive. And I thought about all the ways I could respond. I could call my brother. I could confront him. I could make it loud. But I had testified in 41 cases by then. I knew how this worked. Loud is for amateurs. Loud is for people who do not have a paper trail. I called my attorney the next morning. Her name is Constance Yardley, and she had been my mentor's law partner for 15 years before she opened her own practice. She is 63 and built like a small concrete pillar, and she does not waste a single word. I told her everything, the hospitalization at 19, which she already knew about, the bank withdrawals, the forged documents, the pattern of phone calls. She was quiet for a long time. Then she asked me what I wanted to do. I told her I wanted my brother to walk into that courtroom thinking he had already won. I told her I wanted him to commit to his lies under oath. I told her I wanted the judge to see who he was before she saw who I was. I told her I wanted him prosecuted. Constance smiled. She said she had been hoping I would say all of that. The hearing was set for October 24th. That gave me 9 weeks. I used them. I requested original copies of the documents Crawford had submitted. I photographed every legitimate signature of my father's I could find, going back 40 years in a chronological progression so we could show the natural evolution of his handwriting and prove that the forgeries did not match any period of his life. I pulled the surveillance footage from the bank for 2 of the cash withdrawals, and on both of them, my father was visibly disoriented and accompanied by no one, suggesting he had driven himself there in a state he should not have been driving in because someone on the phone had told him to. I tracked down the notary whose stamp appeared on the forged power of attorney. She had retired in 2021. The document was dated 2024. I built the file the way I would have built it for any other case. Methodically, patiently, with every claim cross-referenced and every signature authenticated by a second examiner so no one could accuse me of bias. Constance filed a deliberately bland response on my behalf. We denied the allegations. We stated I was mentally competent. We requested a hearing. We attached nothing. We gave them nothing. Crawford's attorney called Constance to schedule my deposition 4 weeks before the hearing. She said he sounded confident. He said his client had a strong case. Constance told him we looked forward to our day in court. The deposition lasted 2 hours and 40 minutes. Crawford was watching by video link from Boston. I could see him in the upper corner of the screen, sitting in some glass-walled conference room with his arms folded. His attorney asked me about my education. I said SUNY Oswego, accounting and forensic science. He asked me about my employment. I said I worked at a small private firm. He asked me about my mental health history. I told him about the 4-day stay at 19 in flat factual terms, and I told him I had been in regular therapy for the 10 years since, and I had no other psychiatric history. He asked me about my relationship with my father. I said we were close. He asked me about my relationship with my brother. I said we were not. I gave him nothing he could use. I did not explain. I did not defend. I did not defend. I did not get emotional. I answered every question in the fewest words possible, and I watched my brother's face on that screen go from interested to bored to satisfied. He thought I was small. He thought I had nothing. He thought he had already won. 3 weeks before the hearing, I got a phone call I was not expecting. A woman's voice. She introduced herself as Beatrix Colden, Crawford's sister-in-law, Whitley's older sister. She asked if she could meet me. Constance told me not to go. She said it was almost certainly a setup. She said anything I said could be used. I went anyway, because there was something in Beatrix's voice that I recognized. It was the same flatness I had heard in my own voice on bad nights. The flatness of someone who had been carrying something for too long. We met at a diner off the Thruway in Geneva, halfway between Syracuse and her home. Beatrix was in her late 40s, thin, tired-looking, with the kind of careful blonde hair women have when they're trying not to look as old as they feel. She ordered coffee and didn't drink it. She told me she was sorry. She told me she had not known what Crawford and her sister had been doing until about 6 months ago. She told me her own father had died 18 months back, and that the way his estate had been handled had given her bad feelings she had not been able to shake. Her father had been a dentist outside Providence, successful, comfortable, not wealthy. He had developed Parkinson's in his late 70s. Whitley had taken over his finances during the last 2 years of his life. By the time he died, the bank accounts were nearly empty. Whitley had said it was nursing care. The numbers, Beatrix told me, did not match the nursing care. She had confronted her sister once. Just once. Whitley had told her to mind her own business. Beatrix had been afraid since. She told me she had 2 daughters of her own, and she did not want them growing up to learn that their mother and their uncle had done what she was beginning to suspect they had done. She had access to her sister's old emails because Whitley had used her for tech support for years and had never changed her passwords. She had screenshots. She had screenshots. She had voicemails. She had a paper trail of her own. She asked me if I would be willing to take it. She asked me if I would protect her name as long as I could. I called Constance from the parking lot. Constance said we would call the FBI in the morning. The night before the hearing, I drove out to my father's house on Tipperary Hill. I sat in the driveway for a while. I did not go inside. The shop sign was still in the window. The bell still hung on the back of the door. I thought about everything he had taught me. He had once told me that a clean piece of paper is the most honest thing in the world, because it does not yet contain a lie. He had said that printers spent their lives in service of other people's words, and that the best of them never forgot that words mattered. He had said you could tell a lot about a person from how they signed their name. I drove home. I slept 4 hours. I got up. The morning of October 24th, I wore a navy blazer and the silver bracelet. I arrived at the courthouse at 8:15 because that is who I am. Constance was already there. Patrick was not. We had spoken once since I had told him to leave, briefly, on the phone, and he had apologized, but I had told him I needed time. I did not need him in that courtroom. The room was small. Surrogates court matters do not draw much of a crowd. There were maybe 11 people in the gallery. 2 were colleagues of mine from the firm who had heard what was happening and had taken the morning off to be there. 1 was the elderly lady who had been my father's Thursday paper customer for 15 years, who had read the obituary and somehow heard about the case through the parish grapevine. Crawford walked in at 9 on the dot. He wore a dark suit and he did not look at me. Whitley was beside him. Their attorney, the young man in the grey suit, was already at the petitioner's table. Beatrix walked in 2 minutes later. She sat alone in the back row. Whitley saw her and went very still. Judge Whitlock entered. She looked at the case file. She looked up. She saw me. I watched her eyes narrow just slightly and then returned to professional neutrality. The young attorney gave his opening statement. He spoke for 14 minutes. He painted my brother as a concerned son who had been estranged from his sister for reasons of her own choosing. He described our father as a vulnerable man who had been isolated. He presented my hospitalization at 19 as the beginning of a documented pattern. He never mentioned what I did for a living. He had not bothered to look. When he finished, the judge asked Crawford if he wished to address the court directly. He did. He stood. He smoothed his tie. He spoke calmly for the first 30 seconds, and then he lost his composure, in the way I had watched him lose it 1,000 times as a child. His voice rose. He pointed at me. He said I had been unstable for years. He said I had been unstable for years. He said I had positioned myself, manipulated, isolated. He used the word disgrace. He said our father would be ashamed of what I had become. I did not react. I kept my hands folded on the table. The judge let him finish. Then she turned to his attorney and asked him, in that quiet voice of hers, whether he genuinely had no idea who his client was attempting to declare incompetent. The attorney said, with a glance at his notes, that I was an accountant who worked in Syracuse. The judge looked at him for a long moment. Then she turned to Constance. Constance stood. She did not give a speech. She said we would like to present evidence that would, in her words, reframe the court's understanding of this matter. The judge nodded. Constance opened her briefcase. She began with the bank records. She walked the court through the 11 withdrawals over 14 months, $58,400, every one of them within 4 days of a phone call from Whitley Trenton's cell phone in Rhode Island. The attorney's face did not change at first. He was still expecting a trick. Constance then presented the forged documents. She did not announce they were forgeries. She presented them as documents Crawford had submitted in support of his petition. Then she presented 40 years of authenticated signatures from my father. She presented them as a chronological progression, projected on the screen at the front of the courtroom, and she walked the court through the natural evolution of my father's handwriting. The slight downward slope of the H crossbar, the lifted pen between the verticals, the progressively heavier line weight in his last 2 years as his grip weakened, every authentic signature, every consistent feature. Then she put the 3 forged signatures up beside them. The flatness, the traced quality, the wrong line weight. The attorney went pale. Crawford did not. Crawford did not understand yet what was being shown. Constance then introduced me. Not as Crawford's sister. As Hollis Trenton, certified forensic document examiner. 12 years of experience. 41 cases of expert testimony. 8 of them in this very courtroom. She submitted my credentials into evidence. She submitted the corroborating report from a second examiner from a Buffalo firm who had reviewed my findings independently. That is when Crawford's face changed. He turned to his attorney. His attorney would not look at him. Constance presented Beatrix's evidence next. The emails, the voicemails. The pattern, going back 4 years, that established Whitley and Crawford had done this before, to her father, and that the FBI's Albany field office had opened a formal investigation 2 days prior. When Constance sat down, the courtroom was completely silent. Judge Whitlock looked at Crawford's attorney. She asked if he had anything to say in response. He asked for a recess. She granted it. I watched him cross to my brother. I watched him lean down and speak quietly. I watched my brother's face do exactly what my mother's face would have done if she had been there. Go from anger to confusion to that sick pale shade. People turn when they understand, for the first time, that they have lost. He looked at me. For the first time in 11 years, my brother really looked at me. I looked back. I did not smile. I did not need to. When court resumed, his attorney requested permission to withdraw the petition. Judge Whitlock denied the request. She said the evidence presented warranted referral to the district attorney's office for potential criminal prosecution, and that she would be forwarding the case file to the FBI in accordance with their open investigation. She looked at me briefly with what I think was the closest thing to warmth a sitting judge is allowed to show. Then she dismissed the petition with prejudice. It was over in under 2 hours. The FBI moved faster than I had expected. Crawford and Whitley were arrested in mid-December. Federal charges: wire fraud, mail fraud, financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult, conspiracy. The indictment ran to 23 pages. The investigation into Whitley's father's estate was reopened, and the forensic accountants found over $300,000 in unexplained transfers in the 3 years before his death. Beatrix testified for the prosecution. She did so quietly, without seeking any spotlight, and the prosecutor's office granted her immunity. I do not know how she explained it to her own children. I do not envy her that conversation, but she did the right thing, when the right thing was the hardest possible option, and I will respect her for the rest of my life. The trial lasted 3 weeks in the spring. I attended the verdict. Crawford was found guilty on 6 counts. He received 5.5 years in a federal facility in Pennsylvania. Whitley was found guilty on 4 counts and received 4 years. Restitution was ordered in the full amount of the stolen funds plus interest plus penalties. The car dealerships her family owned were not implicated, but the family has, I am told, quietly distanced themselves from her. Her 2 children are being raised by Beatrix. I received 1 letter from my brother, about 3 months after he began serving his sentence. I did not open it. Constance read it and told me it contained no apology. I have not opened the letter, and I do not plan to. My father's estate was settled in March. I kept the house on Tipperary Hill. I could not bring myself to sell it. Patrick and I reconciled, slowly, over the winter, and we go out there sometimes on weekends to sit on the back porch with iced tea. He proposed in April in the back office of the print shop, where my father's apron still hangs on a hook by the door. I said yes. I did not sell the shop either. I hired a journeyman printer from Rochester who had been looking for his own press, and we run it together as a partnership now. We print wedding invitations and funeral programs and birth announcements. We print church bulletins for half the parishes on the east side. Last month, we printed a chapbook for a man in his 70s who had been writing in secret for 30 years and finally decided he wanted to hold his words in his hands. That was the kind of man my father was. That is the kind of shop I want to keep. People ask me sometimes whether I feel sorry for my brother. They ask whether I think the sentence was too harsh, or whether the family is broken beyond repair. I tell them the truth. I tell them the truth. I tell them family is not a status you inherit. It is something you build with the people who show up, by the small repeated act of choosing each other. My father chose me. My grandfather chose my father. The Thursday paper customer chose to come to the funeral. Constance chose to take my case. Beatrix chose to do the hardest thing she had ever done. Patrick eventually chose to come back, and to be better, and to listen. Crawford made his own choices. He made them clearly, and he made them for a long time. He chose to take money from a man who was forgetting who he was. He chose to forge the signature of a father who had taught him to write his own name. He chose in a courtroom to call his sister a disgrace. He forgot one thing. He forgot I had spent 5 years of my professional life looking at signatures under a microscope. He forgot that I had been raised by a man who believed paper kept the truth long after voices had stopped repeating it. He forgot that the quietest person in the room is sometimes the one holding the entire paper trail. Thank you for staying with me to the end of this. If this story meant something to you, please consider subscribing for more stories like it and tell me in the comments where you're listening from. Every one of you matters to me. There's another story waiting on your screen right now. I've thought a lot about that morning in the surrogate's court since it happened, and the thing I keep returning to is how quiet it actually was. There was no shouting from my side of the room. There was no dramatic gesture. There was a manila folder, a projection screen, and a woman in a navy blazer who had been preparing for that day, in one way or another, the most of her adult life. My brother thought he could rewrite our father's signature because he believed nobody was watching closely enough to catch him. He was wrong about that, and the reason he was wrong is the only real lesson I have to offer anyone who has ever felt small inside their own family. Character is not what you say about yourself when it's convenient. It is what you do when no one is keeping score. My father chose for 37 years to run a small, honest business in a town that did not always reward small, honest businesses. He chose to raise 2 children alone when their mother decided motherhood was optional. He chose to teach me the slow, patient skills that nobody seems to value anymore. How to read a balance sheet, how to keep a receipt, how to look at a signature and ask whether the hand that made it was steady or shaking. Crawford had the same father. He was offered the same lessons. He chose not to learn them. And over time, those small refusals hardened into the kind of man who could forge his own father's name without flinching. Nothing in his life happened to him by accident. He built it one choice at a time, the same way I built mine. The intelligence part is what I want women in particular to hear, because we are taught from a young age that being loud is the same as being strong, and it isn't. Real intelligence is patience. It is the willingness to stay quiet in a deposition when every part of you wants to defend yourself because you understand that defending yourself in that moment hands the other side a weapon. It is the discipline to build a file before you build a case. It is the humility to ask a second examiner to verify your findings because you know your judgment is sharpest when it has been checked. And the courage. I want to say something about the courage because Beatrix is the one who taught me what it actually looks like. Courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is what Beatrix did at that diner in Geneva when she sat across from a woman she barely knew and handed over evidence that would send her own sister to prison because she could not live another year as the person who looked away. Courage is choosing the harder right over the easier wrong when nobody is forcing your hand. My father used to say that paper outlives voices. I think what he really meant was that the truth waits. It waits patiently for someone with the steadiness to read it. If you are carrying something quiet right now, keep your records. Keep your composure. Keep your composure. Keep building. The people who underestimate you are writing your closing argument for you, one mistake at a time.